Guiseo was originally a rich Chibal heir, surrounded by people constantly flattering him. Because of that, Guiseo became arrogant and conceited. He always thought that no one would dare to go against his will. But one fine day, Guiseo's girlfriend suddenly disappeared without a single word of explanation. The arrogant and self-righteous man became even more distant after that. That day, his close friend came running with a medical report and told Guiseo that Jimin had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. Knowing the reason why his girlfriend suddenly disappeared, Guiseo tried every possible way and finally found Jimin hiding in the countryside. At first, he was full of anger, wanting to question her why she had vanished without saying a word, but the moment he saw her, he could only gently ask if she had eaten. Guiseo said that he already knew about Jimin's illness and wanted her to return to the hospital for treatment. Jimin didn't want to waste her remaining time on a meaningless struggle. She knew her illness had no hope. Hearing that, Guiseo became emotional and said he would not allow her to give up and live like that. He insisted on performing the surgery himself. Very soon, Jimin was lying on the operating table, but the situation was far worse than expected, and there was no point in continuing. Guiseo couldn't accept the truth and desperately refused to stop, wanting to continue the surgery alone. Jimin's father, who was also the hospital director, couldn't bear it any longer and stepped in to stop him. That day, after being discharged, Jimin was about to go out when Guiseo appeared in front of her. He said that Korea was too cold and wanted to take her to warm Hawaii to live for 5 years before coming back. He even said he wanted to have 2 children, preferably 1 boy and 1 girl. Seeing the man dream all the way about their beautiful future together, Jimin couldn't bring herself to interrupt him. Not knowing what else to do, she followed him to the airport. When Guiseo finished buying the tickets and came back, Jimin, who had been waiting in her seat, had disappeared. Guiseo hurriedly chased after her and happened to see Jimin getting into a car and leaving. He immediately hijacked a taxi to follow. The car stopped at a pier. Enduring the discomfort in her body, Jimin bought a cute teddy bear, then boarded the ferry heading to the opposite island. Guiseo teased her, asking if she had another man. Was that man living on the island over there? But she only said there was someone she must apologize to before she died. That sentence left Guiseo stunned. 2 years ago, because of her carelessness at work, a little girl had contracted HIV during a blood transfusion. The patient's family blamed the hospital, saying it was clearly their fault, and asked why no one would take responsibility. They also cried out about what would happen to the little girl, Bomb, in the future. But Bomb's mother firmly said it would be fine. Even with HIV, one could live 10 years, 20 years, or even 100 years. At that time, Jimin had been too terrified and kept hiding, not daring to admit her mistake. For the past 2 years, she had lived every day in guilt. Before dying, she wanted to go and apologize to that girl, and she told Guiseo that if she couldn't meet the girl, she hoped he would say sorry on her behalf. Guiseo didn't want to hear those words that sounded like a final farewell. He angrily refused her, then ran to a corner and vomited. At that moment, young Shin saw that he looked unwell and enthusiastically taught him a folk remedy for seasickness. But Guiseo showed no gratitude at all. He didn't even glance at her and kept vomiting, and the more he vomited, the more exaggerated he became. Young Shin couldn't stand it any longer and stepped forward to help him. On the other side, Jimin accidentally saw a little girl sitting across from her and heard that her name was Bomb. She was instantly moved to tears. When Guiseo returned, he saw his girlfriend leaning with her eyes closed on the little girl's shoulder. The girl called out to young Shin, saying that an older sister had given her a teddy bear. Young Shin didn't understand why her daughter had received a teddy bear from a stranger. Just then, Guiseo realized that his girlfriend was no longer responding, realizing she might have left him forever. He trembled, stepped forward, and held her tightly in his arms, breaking down in grief and crying uncontrollably. Standing beside them, young Shin immediately covered her daughter's eyes. After his girlfriend's death, Guiseo lived every day in depression. That day, the husband of a patient, greedy for money, stood by his dying wife's hospital bed, forcing her to sign all sorts of property transfer agreements. Then he turned around and called his lover. Hearing that, Guiseo furiously rushed in and attacked the bastard. Because of that, he lost his job and was thrown into prison. Fortunately, his wealthy and influential mother immediately sent a lawyer to bail him out. Hearing that he had been fired by the hospital, his mother was delighted and told him to take this opportunity to come work at the family company. Since Guiseo had failed to save his sick girlfriend, he had lost confidence in himself and no longer wanted to be a doctor, so he agreed to his mother's suggestion. Coincidentally, Chairman Kang had his eyes on a small island that he wanted to develop into a resort. In the company, there was a very capable employee named Siokyun, whose hometown happened to be that small island. Therefore, Chairman Kang appointed him as the project manager and told him to take Guiseo along as an assistant when going to survey the island. She even lied that Guiseo was the son of their family driver and told Siokyun not to be polite. He could assign all the heavy and dirty work to him, but how could a rich young master endure hardship? As soon as they set out, he said that he didn't drive, and that he always slept once he got in the car because of his weak stamina. Indeed, just as he said, he fell asleep immediately after getting in. Annoyed, Siokyun deliberately turned the music volume to the maximum, but Guiseo still lay motionless. When they arrived, Guiseo realized that the island his mother wanted to develop was the same island his late girlfriend had wished to visit. She had wanted him to apologize to the little girl from back then, telling her that she hadn't meant to cause harm, that she had blamed herself deeply and been in great pain. The life of that girl's mother, young Shin, was not easy either. She had once believed the sweet words of her boyfriend, Siokyun, but he had never intended to take responsibility. Not long after, he abandoned young Shin and enlisted in the military. Later, she learned that his pursuit of her had only been because of a bet with his friends, which caused her immense pain. Ironically, around that time she discovered she was pregnant. She chose to give birth and became a single mother, raising her daughter on her own. 8 years later, Siokyun returned to his hometown for work. On the way, he almost hit a little girl. The girl's bravery impressed him, and out of curiosity he asked whose child she was. The girl didn't answer, but turned her head to look at her mother, not far away. Siokyun followed her gaze. When he saw the woman's face clearly, he was stunned. He asked who the child was. She said it was her daughter. At that moment, Siokyun's mother arrived. Seeing her, young Shin was about to leave, but his mother immediately called her back, proudly introducing the wealthy fiancé her son had brought home. Then, as usual, she urged young Shin not to be too picky and to find a father for Bom soon. Her tone was full of disdain toward the mother and daughter. Siokyun felt ashamed and apologized to the two of them, then took his mother and fiancé away. The little nephew innocently said that Bom looked a lot like his grandmother, not only having the same mole at the corner of her mouth, but also sharing the same preferences and personality. The villagers all said that Bom was truly the old lady's real granddaughter. Hearing that, Siokyun immediately felt uneasy and wanted to go back to ask for clarification, but since his fiancée was still in the car, he temporarily gave up. That night, he went to young Shin's house, intending to ask her the truth, but he didn't have the courage to do so. Siokyun's mother called and told her son not to overthink things since he already had a fiancée. Whether Bom was his daughter or not no longer mattered. She didn't want young Shin to have any chance to hold on to her son. The next day, Siokyun's mother arranged a blind date for young Shin. She was called there without knowing why. Seeing a single uncle from the village there, she politely greeted him as uncle. Hearing that, Siokyun's mother immediately corrected her, saying that the man was only 14 years older and still single, so she should call him brother to sound closer. Realizing it was a blind date, young Shin was so shocked that she accidentally spat out the milk she was drinking. Just as she didn't know how to decline, Bom hurriedly ran in and said that their grandfather had wet his pants again. It turned out that young Shin had a grandfather suffering from Alzheimer's. Every time he wet himself, he refused to let his granddaughter change his clothes. Young Shin had no choice but to call her younger brother, who was studying at a university far away in Seoul, to come and help. Although it only happened about once a month, her brother still urged her to find a man to marry, so she would have support and someone to help take care of their grandfather. Moreover, Bom's dream was to have a father. For the sake of her daughter and grandfather, young Shin decided to look for someone she could entrust her life to. She took the initiative to open her heart to that single uncle. But although he could accept that she had a daughter, he couldn't accept that she also had a grandfather who couldn't take care of himself. Disappointed, young Shin had to leave. Guiseo also came to the island for work. At that time, he was feeling bored and wandered around. He saw the teddy bear that his late girlfriend had bought being carried on the back of an old man. Curious, he followed him. When the old man noticed him, he warmly invited him into his house and enthusiastically offered him his favorite hot chocolate. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to leave, he suddenly felt dizzy. At that moment, young Shin returned home with her daughter Bom and discovered him. Bom looked at the fainted man and felt that he seemed somewhat familiar. The old man, however, still acted as if he knew nothing. In fact, Guiseo had fainted because the old man had mixed his own medicine into the hot chocolate earlier. Since his granddaughter said it was something good, he generously shared it with his guest. While unconscious, Guiseo kept hearing his late girlfriend's last words echoing in his mind. When he woke up, he immediately grabbed the teddy bear that his girlfriend had bought before she died. Without saying a word, he left. Seeing that the teddy bear she loved most was taken away by the strange man, Bom anxiously ran after him and shouted, "Thief!" Guiseo, irritated, asked about the origin of the teddy bear. Bom lowered her head and softly said, "A big sister gave it to me." Hearing that, he said his girlfriend had given it to the wrong person, that it actually belonged to someone else. Since she was sick and mistook her for another child, she had given the bear to Bomb by mistake. Bomb stubbornly said, "No." The big sister clearly said she was giving it to her. Bomb then recalled that the strange man in front of her was the one who had been with the sister who gave her the teddy bear that day. Not knowing what to do, she reluctantly followed him and said, "If you take back something you already gave to someone, you'll grow hair on your butt." At that moment, shouting could be heard from the roadside. A villager had been seriously injured. The crowd urged the village doctor to stop the bleeding and save the person. But seeing the blood flowing non-stop, the village doctor panicked and ran to the side to vomit. Guiseo originally didn't want to get involved, but seeing how unreliable the village doctor was and that the patient's life was in danger, he finally stepped in to save the person as a doctor. The man was saved, but Guiseo fainted again. When he woke up in the hospital, he remembered that he had left his phone at the old man's house, so he went back to retrieve it. Seeing that the little girl was still staring at the teddy bear in his hand, he generously stuffed some money into her hand, saying that he was buying it, and told her to use the money to buy another one. At that moment, young Shin called out to stop him. Guiseo thought she was complaining about the small amount, but she said that her daughter didn't need the money, and that if he wanted the bear, he could just take it. She had heard that the teddy bear originally belonged to his late girlfriend. After that, Guiseo asked where he could find a restaurant. Knowing that he hadn't eaten all day, young Shin enthusiastically prepared him a hearty meal. Seeing that it was already late, she even offered him an empty room in her house to stay in. Guiseo acted like a boss, ordering young Shin to clean up the room. That night, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Ever since his girlfriend passed away, he had suffered from insomnia every night. Suddenly, he heard a gentle singing voice coming from the next room. Young Shin was singing a lullaby to her daughter. Listening to it, Guiseo gradually drifted off to sleep. The next day, he left young Shin's house and moved into the only hotel on the island. But at night, he still couldn't sleep. To fall asleep, he even called a woman over just to sing him a lullaby. As a result, she scolded him for being insane. Unable to sleep, he unconsciously went back to young Shin's house. Hearing the innocent conversation between the mother and daughter inside, he couldn't help but smile. That night, Bomb sang a lullaby for her mother, but the one who fell asleep first was Guiseo. Siokyun suspected that the little girl in front of him might be his daughter. After hesitating for a long time, he finally gathered the courage to ask young Shin what kind of person Bomb's father was. Young Shin replied, "Her father is an angel." After saying that, she left him standing there in a daze, carrying her daughter away without looking back. She knew that Siokyun already had a fiancé and didn't want her daughter to affect his relationship. More importantly, her love for him had long since disappeared. While lost in her thoughts about the past, young Shin suddenly missed a step and accidentally dropped her sleeping daughter to the ground. She nervously hugged Bomb, repeatedly apologizing, blaming herself not only for her carelessness that almost hurt her daughter, but also for her selfish choice years ago that had caused Bomb to be born without a father. Bomb was a special child. 2 years ago, she had been in a car accident and, due to the hospital's mistake, became infected with HIV during a blood transfusion. At that moment, young Shin felt as if her entire world had collapsed, but she quickly forced herself to be strong. Her poor daughter needed her care. Since then, young Shin had taken even better care of her daughter, though she never spoiled her, carefully teaching her how to protect herself and protect others from being infected. Every day, Bomb had to memorize the family rules. 1. Never use anyone else's toothbrush or nail clipper, and never lend yours to others. 2. If you bleed, use the towel your mother gave you to wipe the blood, then put it in a plastic bag and bring it home. 3. If you are injured and bleeding, do not accept help from anyone else. Bomb could understand the first and second rules, but she couldn't understand the third. Why couldn't she accept help from her friends when she was bleeding? Young Shin had no choice but to lie to her daughter, telling her that she was an angel from heaven. Her blood was a secret that only her mother and the doctor could see, and no one else could. That day, Siokyun took his nephew to play basketball. Bomb happened to pass by, and happily stood nearby to cheer them on. Just then, the ball suddenly flew toward her and hit her in the face. When Bomb realized she was having a nosebleed, she remembered her mother's teaching, and quickly covered her nose and ran away. Worried, Siokyun chased after her, wanting to wipe the blood and check the injury, but young Shin stopped him, refusing to let him help, and letting the girl handle it herself. She asked Bomb what she should do when she was bleeding. Bomb clearly answered that she shouldn't accept help from others. Then, she obediently ran to the side, skillfully wiped away the blood from her nose, and put the bloody tissue into a bag. Young Shin looked at her sensible daughter with a heavy heart, while Siokyun couldn't understand why she taught her that way, and looked at the little girl with deep pity. At that moment, Guiseo, standing from afar, had been watching Bomb for a long time. He, remembered his late girlfriend telling him that because of her mistake, a child had contracted HIV during a blood transfusion. As a doctor, seeing this, Guiseo immediately realized that Baum was the child his girlfriend had spoken of. Because of her negligence, this child had been infected with HIV. The teddy bear had not been given to the wrong person after all. It had reached the poor little girl before his girlfriend passed away. After returning home, Baum found that her grandfather, who had Alzheimer's, had scribbled all over her favorite poster. Her mother's lipstick was also broken. Angry, she scolded him for always causing trouble and making her mother work so hard every day. Seeing that, young Shin scolded her daughter for speaking that way. But the girl said she only spoke up because her grandfather always made her mother sad. Young Shin told her that she wasn't sad and that every day she was actually very happy. She walked over to her grandfather, who was bowing his head like a child who had done something wrong, and asked him to help her put on makeup as beautifully as on the poster. The old man happily helped his granddaughter draw a clown face. Seeing that, Baum realized her mistake and immediately apologized to her grandfather for what she had said earlier. Then she insisted that he draw the same clown face on her as well. After comforting the two most important people in her life, young Shin was about to cook them a hearty dinner when Siokyun appeared at the door and called her, getting straight to the point. He asked if Baum was his daughter. Not wanting to have any further connection with him, young Shin denied it and even humiliated herself, saying that back then, he wasn't the only man in her life. Siokyun refused to believe her words, saying that he would not avoid his responsibility and that he would persuade his mother to accept her and their daughter. Young Shin couldn't understand why, after she had made everything so clear, and despite the fact that he already had a fiancé, he still wouldn't let her go. Siokyun said that every time he saw Baum, his heart ached. But young Shin once again insisted that Baum's father was someone else, then turned around and left. In the middle of the night, unable to sleep, Guiseo went to the mother and daughter's house again. Hearing the lullaby from inside, he slowly closed his eyes. Early in the morning, Baum sleepily went to the bathroom and didn't notice someone sitting outside the door. Then, her half-awake grandfather came out, saw Guiseo sleeping on the ground, and couldn't wake him up. So out of kindness, he dragged him inside to continue sleeping. Hearing the noise, young Shin thought her daughter was cold and, with her eyes still closed, hugged the person tightly. When Baum came back and saw a stranger sleeping in her bed, she immediately woke her mother. Startled, young Shin sat up and asked her daughter why there was a man here. Baum said she didn't know. That when she came back from the bathroom, she just saw her mother hugging him tightly. Young Shin couldn't believe what she was seeing. Guiseo, startled awake, was equally shocked. He had no idea how he ended up sleeping in the room. Baum asked if he had come again to steal the teddy bear. Taking the chance, Guiseo said he didn't need the teddy bear anymore and gave it back to Baum, saying it was payment for the room. That made Baum very happy, and she instantly grew fond of him, while Guiseo was simply finding an excuse to go back to sleep. While taking a shower, Guiseo suddenly saw his late girlfriend gently talking to him, even playfully splashing water, so he happily played along with her. Hearing strange laughter from inside, young Shin became worried and called out, but there was no response. After hesitating for a long time, she finally pushed the bathroom door open to check. Guiseo, laughing like crazy under the shower, was suddenly pulled out of his beautiful dream. He glared fiercely at young Shin and scolded her, calling her a perverted woman who liked to peek at men bathing. He even teased her afterward. Terrified, young Shin immediately ran back to her room, leaving Baum staring at her in confusion. The next morning, young Shin brought breakfast to Guiseo's room but found no one inside. Boldly, she started complaining. "You just stayed here without leaving, and last night you even shamelessly yelled at me like that." Just as she was speaking, Guiseo suddenly appeared behind her. Completely ignoring her complaints, he said he didn't eat Korean-style breakfast and told her to just prepare 2 slices of toast and a cup of coffee for him next time. When Baum heard that the uncle would be staying with them, she jumped up and down with joy. Young Shin, however, was very annoyed by his self-centered decision and wanted to kick him out. Unexpectedly, Guiseo took out an envelope, saying he would stay there for at most a month, paying her 1 million, 1 per day, and even paying a month's rent in advance. Seeing such a large sum of money, young Shin was immediately subdued by the power of money and obediently told Baum to go buy bread and coffee. And so, Guiseo began living with the mother and daughter. On one hand, it was because his mother had sent him there for work, so he needed a place to stay. On the other hand, it was because of his late girlfriend's last words. She had told him that if she couldn't meet them herself, he should apologize to the mother and daughter on her behalf and tell them she never meant to cause harm. Young Shin only charged him 200,000 won per day. His girlfriend had once said that young Shin would forgive her, as she seemed to be a very kind person. When Siokyun heard that Guiseo had decided to stay at young Shin's house, after getting drunk, he poured out a long confession and handed Guiseo an envelope, asking him to help take care of young Shin. Guiseo, realizing the relationship between the two, asked why he didn't go care for her himself. Siokyun shook his head and said he couldn't go, and wasn't allowed to go. Then he explained that young Shin not only had to raise her young daughter but also care for her grandfather with Alzheimer's. Moreover, with her personality, even if she was exhausted, she would never ask anyone for help. Siokyun asked Guiseo to protect her in his place, and also to take care of Bom, as if he were her father. Guiseo casually agreed. In the days that followed, although he still had a sharp tongue, whenever the mother and daughter needed help, he would step in without hesitation. Bom grew more and more fond of this uncle who felt like a father to her. That day, Guiseo and Siokyun were attacked by thugs in the village. Because of the resort development project, the two fought side by side, and Guiseo was seriously injured while protecting Siokyun. Hearing the news from her close friend, who was a nurse, young Shin became so worried that she waited at the door for them to return. When Siokyun's car arrived, she helped Guiseo down and supported him into the house, refusing to rest until she saw him lying down safely. Seeing that, Guiseo wanted to tease her even more, saying she should just lie down next to him so it would be easier to keep watch. Frightened by his shameless words, young Shin quickly turned around and ran away. That night, her curious friend came over and told young Shin that she had learned a secret from one of Guiseo's old classmates. It turned out that Guiseo's girlfriend had died not long ago from pancreatic cancer. Guiseo had personally performed the surgery but failed, and because of the guilt, he had stopped being a doctor. Hearing that, young Shin felt deep sympathy for Guiseo and gathered her courage to go to his room. Facing Guiseo's bad temper, she was no longer afraid and boldly said that she could sleep beside him like he had asked before. Having no way to deal with her stubbornness, Guiseo had no choice but to obediently get under the blanket and let her take care of him through the night. Meanwhile, Siokyun's mother was holding Bom and looking into the mirror with her, saying that everyone kept saying the two of them looked alike, but in fact, they didn't look alike at all. Bom agreed, saying that was true. They didn't look alike in the slightest. Still stubborn, Siokyun's mother refused to acknowledge having a poor granddaughter. But when she accidentally noticed the mole at the corner of Bom's mouth that was identical to her own, she couldn't resist rubbing at it, trying to erase the annoying mark. Bom cried out in pain and loudly said she also hated being told that she looked like the old lady. Hearing that, Siokyun's mother immediately became displeased, boasting that the girl should feel honored to look like her because she had been a great beauty when she was young, her face no bigger than a hand, unlike Bom's, which was as wide as a playground. Hearing that, Bom pouted in frustration and pinched her chubby cheeks. Siokyun's mother looked toward the door, anxious because young Shin still hadn't returned. Lately, Siokyun had been paying more and more attention to young Shin and her daughter, completely ignoring his mother's advice. Furious, she stormed over to accuse young Shin of seducing her son and destroying his happiness, demanding that the mother and daughter leave the village and disappear from Siokyun's life. She didn't hesitate to kneel down, even threatening her own life to pressure young Shin. Kind-hearted as she was, young Shin couldn't bring herself to go against an elder's wishes, yet she also couldn't bear to leave the place where she had lived since childhood. Crying, she told Siokyun's mother that she would do anything she asked, except leave. Hearing that, Siokyun's mother advised her to get married, and to do it sooner than Siokyun, the sooner the better. With no other choice, young Shin reluctantly agreed. Their conversation was overheard by Guiseo in the room. The next day, when young Shin was arranged to go on a blind date, Guiseo secretly followed her the whole way and made many unpleasant remarks, such as, "You can't live without a man, you flirt with one person after another, and you even peeked at me while I was showering." Young Shin asked him what was wrong. Was he interested in her? Hearing that, Guiseo immediately replied, "And what if I am? If that's true, then you won't go on the date, right?" Young Shin didn't expect him to answer like that. Embarrassed, she said her standards were very high and that she would never be interested in someone like him. Guiseo immediately boasted that his family was extremely wealthy and that his mother was a powerful chaebol. Young Shin didn't believe a word of it and said she hated arrogant, self-centered men. Then she ignored him and turned to leave. The man she met on the blind date, however, was very pleased with her. He didn't mind that she had a daughter and was even willing to help care for her grandfather with Alzheimer's. At their first meeting, he eagerly reached out to hold young Shin's hand. While driving, Guiseo saw the two walking hand in hand on the street. Suddenly, he turned the steering wheel sharply and drove straight toward them. Terrified, the man from the blind date immediately hid behind young Shin. Guiseo scolded him for hiding behind a woman to protect his own life, saying he wasn't worthy of being called a man. The man could only curse in frustration and mutter a few words of concern to young Shin. When young Shin returned, Siokyun's mother anxiously came forward to ask how the date had gone. Hearing that the man was very pleased and that young Shin didn't think he was bad either, she was overjoyed and said she would arrange for young Shin to be married off in grand style, just like her own daughter. But not long after, a neighbor found out that the man from the blind date wanted to marry young Shin, only to take her land. Moreover, his ex-wife had reportedly died from domestic abuse. Furious, the neighbor scolded Siokyun's mother for introducing such a man to Youngshin, accusing her of pushing someone into a pit of fire. Realizing the man's true nature, Siokyun's mother regretted not investigating more carefully. Though she had wanted to help her son quickly rid himself of complications, she still had a conscience. And when the man came to explain himself, she angrily scolded him. Unwilling to give up on the naive Youngshin, the man went to her house, knelt down, and begged for forgiveness, swearing that he would repent, start anew, and treat her and her daughter well. Youngshin didn't respond, but also knelt down, saying she had something she had been hiding from him. She explained that she had wanted to tell him earlier, but didn't have the courage. Just as she was about to, confess that her daughter was unfortunately infected with HIV, Guiseo, who had been staying at her house, suddenly appeared and interrupted their conversation. Knowing that the man was nothing but a scoundrel, Guiseo rudely ordered him to leave. The man, refusing to back down, told Guiseo to stay out of other people's business and then questioned Youngshin about her relationship with him. Youngshin shook her head and said there was nothing between them, but Guiseo immediately answered, not with words, but with his actions. While being forcibly kissed, Youngshin suddenly saw Siokyun standing dazed in the distance. Only then did she snap out of it and panic, dodging the unexpected kiss. Guiseo turned around and domineeringly declared to the scoundrel that Youngshin was his woman, warning him not to harass her again. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind having another life on his hands. Terrified, the man hurriedly ran away. Noticing Siokyun standing behind them, Guiseo deliberately told Youngshin that from the day she slept in his room, he had already set his eyes on her and couldn't let her go. He even warned her that if she still thought about another man, she was as good as dead. Hearing that their relationship had reached the point of sleeping together, Siokyun turned around and left in disappointment. The next morning, Guiseo deeply regretted his impulsive behavior from the night before, convincing himself that he only did it because he didn't want Youngshin foolishly marrying someone she didn't truly like. He also told himself that it was a good deed, helping her cut ties completely with Siokyun, though deep down, it was jealousy he refused to admit. Worried that Youngshin might bring up what happened last night, Guiseo planned to sneak out of the house. But then he saw her touching her lips, seemingly lost in thought, recalling the kiss from the night before. His heart swelled with pride, and he couldn't stop himself from smiling. Yet the very next second, he saw her start wiping her lips furiously, and his mood plummeted from the clouds straight to the ground. At that moment, Bomb appeared and greeted him loudly. Trying to save face, Guiseo pretended to scold her for being late to school every day. The poor girl became an innocent scapegoat. Fearing that the unpredictable man might suddenly attack her again like the night before, Youngshin wore a mask even at home to protect herself. That act infuriated Guiseo. He grabbed her face and said he wasn't some infectious patient, warning her that if she kept acting disgusted toward him, he would kiss her again. While working with Guiseo, Siokyun discovered that he wasn't the driver's son, as the chairman had claimed, but the chairman's only son. Because of that, he believed Guiseo's feelings for Youngshin were nothing more than a momentary impulse and not genuine affection. He also said that the two of them were incompatible. Guiseo replied that whether they were compatible or not wasn't for Siokyun to decide, where it was for himself to decide. Siokyun was left speechless. That day, Guiseo found a villager who had suffered a stroke and collapsed in the field. Although he immediately tried to save the girl, it was unfortunately too late. The scene reminded him once again of his late girlfriend, whom he had been unable to save. While Guiseo was still drowning in guilt and pain, the villagers who had witnessed the entire rescue process saw him perform a tracheotomy on the patient, yet the person still couldn't be saved. They immediately believed he had caused the death and, in a panic, called the police, shouting "murdering quack" over and over. Already tormented by guilt for failing to save the patient, and haunted by memories of being unable to save his late girlfriend, Guiseo was completely crushed. Faced with the police interrogation, he was consumed by shame and sorrow, choosing not to defend himself or say a single word, letting the police take him away without resistance. Witnessing everything, Youngshin rushed to the police station to explain what had happened, but the witnesses firmly claimed there was no concrete evidence, so the police couldn't release him. Worried sick, Youngshin waited outside the station and refused to leave. At some point, she realized she seemed to care more and more about this man who had suddenly appeared in her life. Meanwhile, Siokyun followed behind her, watching her worry about another man, and he began to regret his past choices more and more. Just then, the village doctor came running and told them the old woman who died already had health problems and ignored medical advice by discharging herself. Even if Guiseo hadn't performed the procedure, she wouldn't have survived. As long as we can find her husband to testify, Guiseo's name can be cleared. Otherwise, even if he avoids prison, he'll lose his medical license. That night, Youngshin immediately went to beg the old man to testify at the police station. Siokyun, who also owed Guiseo for saving his mother's life, arrived arrived first and knelt at the old man's doorstep before she did. But no matter how much Siokyun pleaded, the old man refused to testify. In truth, it had been him who insisted his wife leave the hospital and even forced her to work in the fields despite her illness, which ultimately led to the tragedy. Siokyun knelt in the rain all night. The next morning, the old man opened the door and angrily shouted at him, "Even if you kneel for another 100 days, I won't blink an eye." But to everyone's surprise, right after saying those harsh words, the old man turned back and finally poured out what he had been suppressing in his heart. Agitated, he confessed that it was his fault for forcing his wife to spray pesticides, that he had thought she was faking her illness and ended up driving her to death. Tormented by guilt, he finally agreed to testify. Guiseo was quickly released. But because of what had happened, he decided not to return to the village and instead go back to his former life. Young Shin quietly watched him leave. Though reluctant, she was glad that he had regained his freedom. When Bom heard that Uncle Guiseo wouldn't be coming back, she couldn't accept it and burst into tears. After that day, Guiseo completely gave up being a doctor and began working at his mother's company. He became colder and more indifferent than before, caring about nothing. Yet one thing remained the same: his sleepless nights. Only when he remembered the lullaby sung by young Shin and her daughter could he fall asleep for a while. Bom believed that her uncle would surely come back, so she stopped being late for school, hoping that one day when he returned, he would praise her for it. Young Shin also often thought of Guiseo, the man who had stirred her heart. One day, she saw on TV the heartbreaking scenes of children living with HIV and couldn't hold back her tears. Seeing that, her grandfather grew angry and scolded the children on the screen. Young Shin grabbed his arm and cried, saying, "They're not bad children, they're just poor children. They're children who have the same illness as Bom." Because of Young Shin's momentary loss of control, her grandfather, who had Alzheimer's, learned about Bom's condition. The next day, when he saw a neighborhood child being scolded by adults, he absent-mindedly mistook her for Bom and blurted out, "My Bom has HIV. She's a kind and poor child, so don't hit her." The neighbor was horrified upon hearing those words. Very soon, the news spread throughout the entire village. The local women couldn't believe it and came to ask Young Shin if Bom really had HIV. At that point, Young Shin could no longer deny it. Watching her daughter happily playing with her friends, she couldn't hold back her tears as she thought about the poor child who was about to face discrimination and isolation. Sure enough, not long after, the women began showing up one after another. They pulled their children away from Bom, as if avoiding a plague. Completely unaware of what had happened, Bom still innocently waved to her friends and said goodbye, promising to see them again the next day. Young Shin hugged her daughter tightly, not showing any sign of distress. Forcing herself to calm down, she smiled and suggested they go home and cook something delicious together. But when they got home, they found that grandfather had been locked inside their house. The old man was huddled in a corner, trembling in fear. Seeing this, sensible little Bom immediately ran over and hugged her frightened grandfather. After learning that it was the neighbor who had locked him up, she wanted to confront him right away. But Young Shin stopped her and refused to let her go out, no matter how much she protested. Bom, upset that her grandfather had been bullied, and her mother, that wouldn't let her seek justice, pouted in anger. Her grandfather, drifting in and out of lucidity, saw that she was upset and awkwardly raised 2 fingers in a V sign, saying he was fine and not scared anymore. Seeing that, Bom finally cheered up. Young Shin teased her daughter, and the family began playfully tossing flour at each other, filling the house with laughter once again. At that moment, the village clinic was packed with people. They lined up, demanding to be tested to see if they had been infected with HIV. Although the doctor repeatedly explained that HIV could not be transmitted through the air, and that even holding hands, sharing meals, or bathing together would not cause infection, the villagers refused to believe it and became even more agitated. They began blaming Young Shin for hiding the truth from everyone. Her close friend, who was a nurse, immediately stepped in to explain that she had been the one who stopped Young Shin from revealing the truth back then. If it had been made public, she said, Young Shin's family would never have been able to continue living in the village. Because of people's prejudice against HIV, poor Bom would not have been able to go to school, have friends, or live a normal life. She tried to comfort everyone and urged them not to overreact. But the villagers ignored her explanation, growing angrier and stepping forward to scold and berate her for covering up for Young Shin's family. Siokyun's fiancé learned about this and felt deep sympathy for the understanding little girl Bom, thinking that the villagers wanting to drive Young Shin's family away was too cruel. Siokyun's mother appeared tough, saying it was not excessive at all to keep a child with such a terrifying disease in the village. What if she infected other children? But deep down, she had been extremely worried. As for Siokyun, as Bom's biological father, after finding out about this, he recalled the time when Young Shin taught Bomb, not to accept help from others and to handle her nosebleed on her own. At that time, not understanding the situation, he even blamed Youngshin for teaching an 8-year-old like that. Now he finally knew why she did it. A strong sense of guilt and self-blame, along with deep sorrow for his poor daughter, made him burst into tears uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Guiseo, far away in Seoul, also heard from the village doctor that Bomb's condition had been discovered by everyone and that the villagers wanted to drive the family out. Youngshin originally wanted to stop Bomb from going to school, but because her grandfather with Alzheimer's kept shouting in the room, she lost focus for a moment, and Bomb quickly ran out of the house. On her way to school, Bomb politely greeted the villagers as usual, but everyone avoided her as if she carried a curse. When she arrived at school, the classroom was completely empty. The villagers, afraid that their children would be infected with HIV, secretly kept them home until Youngshin's family voluntarily left the village. At home, Youngshin comforted her grandfather, suggesting they leave the village together and live somewhere else. Although he had Alzheimer's, he still remembered that his son and daughter-in-law had died in the nearby sea, so no matter what she said, he refused to leave. When Youngshin arrived at the school, she saw poor Bomb sitting alone in the classroom. Holding back her tears, she forced a smile and said to Bomb, "Today is the school's anniversary, so there's no class." Bomb believed it and happily went home with her mother. Siokyun quietly followed behind them. At that moment, Bomb's best friend Boram came over. The two little girls immediately held hands, which terrified Boram's mother. Youngshin looked at the two children in confusion. What she had feared most had finally happened. Boram told Bomb that the other kids didn't come to school, not because of the school anniversary, but because their parents said they could get HIV from her. Boram didn't know what HIV was and was about to ask what illness Bomb had when her family pulled her away. Bomb ran to her mother with a puzzled face and asked, "What is HIV, Mom?" Youngshin didn't know how to answer her daughter's cruel question, but Siokyun appeared in time to help her out of the situation. Bomb was completely distracted by his fun magic tricks and no longer asked that question. Youngshin immediately collapsed to the ground, unable to think about anything else, only begging Siokyun for help. That night, Siokyun immediately contacted his friends and found a house in Seoul for them to stay in. To leave smoothly, Youngshin lied to her grandfather, saying they were just visiting her younger brother who was studying at a university in Seoul and would return soon. On the way out, Youngshin looked back at her hometown where she had grown up, feeling reluctant to part with it. Her grandfather, who had been cheerful, suddenly burst into tears when he saw the sea. Seeing him cry, Bomb also cried and said, "Don't cry, Grandpa. We'll come back later. We'll definitely come back later, Grandpa." Just as all three of them couldn't hold back their tears, a car blocked their way. Guiseo, whom they hadn't seen in a long time, appeared coolly in front of them. At that moment, the grandfather, overwhelmed with emotion, fainted. Guiseo rushed forward to perform first aid as the situation turned critical. Youngshin, terrified of losing him, stood by in tears, her heart breaking. Thanks to Guiseo's full efforts in resuscitation, the grandfather finally regained consciousness. Guiseo carried him on his back and ran to the hospital. Youngshin didn't follow them but turned to Siokyun and apologized. Knowing that she wouldn't go with him anymore, Siokyun offered to take her to the hospital. He couldn't hold back and said to her, "If you want me to stay, I'll stay. If you want me by your side, want me to be Bomb's father, then as long as you say the word, I can give up everything to be with you." At the hospital, Bomb noticed that the neighbor's baby had just been brought in. When she tried to reach out and touch the baby's tiny hand, the baby's mother pushed her away harshly, scolding her not to touch her child. The nurse quickly came over and gently led Bomb outside. As soon as they left the hospital, they ran into Bomb's classmate. The boy looked at her as if seeing a ghost and ran away in fear. Hurt and confused, Bomb asked her mother why everyone had become so strange. Youngshin explained that the boy had a stomachache and ran home, then quickly changed the subject to ask about her father's condition. Bomb didn't believe her explanation and remained sad. At that moment, Guiseo came out, smeared a streak of ash on Bomb's face, and told her that no one liked dirty children. Youngshin took out a mirror, and Bomb was startled by her small, sooty face. When they got home, she immediately asked her mother to help her wash up. Bomb had almost forgotten about what had happened, but suddenly remembered the word HIV she had heard from her friend Boram the previous day. She called other kids to ask, and finally found out that it was because she had HIV, a disease that could infect others, which was why everyone avoided her. After settling her grandfather, Youngshin stepped out of the room and saw Guiseo gently speaking to the sky. "Are you doing well? Do you know how much I've worried about you? How much I love you? That's why I came here, because I missed everyone so much. Missed you until I nearly went insane." Faced with such a heartfelt confession, Youngshin shyly lowered her head. Unexpectedly, Guiseo looked at her seriously and asked, "This time you're not going to bow and call me father." It turned out that in the past, after Guiseo had confessed to young Shin, she didn't believe him at all. She even mistakenly thought that her late father, who had passed away without ever saying he loved his daughter, had borrowed someone else's body to tell her those words. At that time, young Shin was drunk and kept bowing to Guiseo while saying over and over that she also loved him very much. Using his humor, Guiseo comforted the physically and emotionally exhausted young Shin, teasing her so much that she completely lost face. When young Shin returned to her room, she hid under the blanket, not noticing that her daughter unconsciously avoided her, not daring to approach the mother she loved the most. In the middle of the night, Bomb secretly used the computer to look up information about HIV. Learning how terrifying the disease was, she began to cry in pain. Being a sensible child, Bomb decided to leave on her own, so as not to be a burden to her family. She said goodbye to her sleeping mother, intending to give her a final kiss, but then stepped back, in fear of infecting her with the dreadful disease. After that, she went to her side, grandfather's room, covered him with the blanket he had kicked off, then carried her favorite little teddy bear, and quietly left the house. The next morning, when young Shin woke up, she discovered that her daughter had run away from home. Ignoring her own exhaustion, she rushed out to search for her missing child. "Mom and Grandpa, please live happily. Don't look for Bomb anymore." Unexpectedly, Bomb ended up taking the same train as her biological father. After the train arrived, Siokyun noticed Bomb carrying a teddy bear and asked where she was going all alone. Bomb didn't answer, lowered her head, and kept walking forward. When Siokyun tried to stop her and ask more, she avoided him and said, "Don't touch me, you'll get HIV." Hearing that Bomb had run away because she was afraid of infecting her mother and grandfather, Siokyun felt heartbroken and wanted to be close to his daughter. He lied to Bomb, saying that he also had HIV, so being with him was fine. Bomb believed him and got into his car without worry. Meanwhile, Guiseo handed the unconscious young Shin to the village doctor for care and went alone around the village, searching for Bomb. When young Shin woke up, she didn't care about her own body, grabbed the photo on the table, and, still in her pajamas and slippers, frantically ran out to find her missing daughter. But no matter how much she searched, she couldn't find her. Worried and full of guilt, she broke down crying. Seeing her running outside without caring for her health, Guiseo immediately came over, put a coat on her shoulders, and told her to calm down. "You're the mother of an 8-year-old child without a father, and she has HIV. There will be even harder roads ahead. How do you plan to face all that?" Young Shin regained her composure but insisted on continuing to look for her daughter. Guiseo decided to help, driving and taking care of both her and Bomb. Siokyun called young Shin, but since she hadn't brought her phone, her Alzheimer-stricken grandfather picked it up and tossed it aside. On the other end of the line, Siokyun told young Shin not to worry, saying he had met Bomb by chance and taken her to an amusement park in Seoul. He said they would return the next day. The old man, bothered by the noise, hung up the call and threw the phone into the closet. Siokyun thought that young Shin didn't want to talk to him, so he didn't think much about it and simply felt happy to have time alone with his daughter. While the father and daughter were on their way to the amusement park, young Shin endured hardship and endless worry. She searched from the village all the way to Seoul. Seeing that she was about to collapse, Guiseo suggested going to the hospital for an injection before continuing the search. Young Shin said there was no need. She just needed a bowl of rice to regain her strength. After devouring 2 bowls of rice, she noticed how miserable she looked and asked Guiseo to lend her some money to buy clothes and shoes. It turned out that she wanted to look normal in case she met her daughter. Guiseo bought a hair clip from a passing student, gently placed it in young Shin's hair, and told her that now she looked just like Bomb's mother. The two of them kept searching tirelessly, but the prolonged exhaustion became too much for young Shin to bear, and she fainted on the road. Guiseo held her tightly as she shivered from the cold, using his own body heat to warm her. Because of young Shin's poor condition, Guiseo had no choice but to stop searching for the time being and take her back to the village for treatment. It was Bomb's first time at an amusement park. Standing among the crowd, she felt afraid and hid herself, knowing that she had HIV and fearing she might infect others, so she dared not touch anyone. Seeing Bomb carefully holding her teddy bear and sitting alone in a corner, Siokyun bought her a beautiful raincoat and said, "This is a magic coat. As long as you wear this magic coat, HIV won't spread to anyone else. From now on, don't worry about others. Don't pay attention to their faces. Just do whatever you want." Wearing the magic coat, Bomb became like any normal child, happily playing in the amusement park. The father and daughter had a truly joyful day. While eating, Siokyun said to Bomb, HIV is a disease, but it won't spread through holding hands or sharing food, so she didn't need to worry about infecting others. She should live confidently. He told her not to bear everything alone or only think about others. Having one fool like her mother was enough, and he told Bomb never to be like her. The little girl asked if Siokyun thought her mother was a fool, which made him quickly deny it. He said her mother wasn't foolish at all, but a very kind and gentle person, and that Bomb was just like her. Hearing him say she was like her mother, Bomb immediately argued that her mother always said she was more like her father. Every time she stood up for her friends, her mother would say she was brave and kind, just like her dad. Hearing his daughter say those words so innocently, Siokyun was overcome with guilt. Hiding in the bathroom, he broke down in tears, blaming himself for betraying young Shin years ago and for letting Bomb grow up without a father. Guiseo carefully took care of young Shin, whose body was on the verge of collapse after searching for her daughter. At that moment, a phone rang inside the closet. He answered and learned that Bomb was with Siokyun. Guiseo suppressed his anger, nearly cursing out loud. He asked where they were, but Siokyun refused to give an exact address and insisted on letting young Shin speak on the phone. Guiseo said nothing more, hung up, and drove straight to Seoul. On the way, he called his mother's company staff and quickly found out Siokyun's address in Seoul. When Siokyun returned home carrying the sleeping Bomb, Guiseo had already arrived. Without a word, he lifted Bomb up, intending to leave. Siokyun said he was going too far and shouted, "Who do you think you are? What are young Shin and Bomb to you?" Guiseo retorted, "And what are you to them?" Just as neither man was willing to back down, Siokyun's fiancée suddenly appeared. Guiseo looked at Siokyun and asked again, "What are you to Bomb?" In her sleep, Bomb sweetly called out Dad. In front of his fiancée, Siokyun didn't respond to his daughter's call and chose to remain silent. Guiseo said domineeringly, "If you can't answer that question, then step aside." After that, he calmly carried Bomb away, taking her back to Youngshin that very night, gently joining the mother and daughter's hands together. Returning to his room, Guiseo, exhausted, immediately fell asleep. When Youngshin opened her eyes, she was overjoyed to see her missing daughter back home. Bomb woke up confused, not understanding how she had returned. Youngshin pretended to be angry, scolding her grandfather with Alzheimer's for wandering off and causing Bomb to follow his example and run away. Bomb quickly defended her remorseful grandfather and admitted her own fault, promising never to leave home again. Now that she had her magic coat, she no longer had to worry about passing her illness to her mother or grandfather. Relieved, Youngshin silently apologized to the old man in her heart, then went to Guiseo's door to thank him. Seeing him sleeping on the cold floor without even a mattress, she thoughtfully laid one down for him. She meant to lift him onto it, but being too weak, she accidentally fell into his arms. As Guiseo slowly leaned closer, Youngshin instinctively closed her eyes. Just as their sative-like 7+ lips were about to meet, Guiseo suddenly stopped for some unknown reason. On their way back, both felt awkward. Youngshin couldn't stop replaying the intimate moment in her mind. Distracted, she slipped into a roadside ditch. After Guiseo helped her up, she suddenly asked, "Are you afraid? Are you afraid that I have a daughter with HIV? People in the village treat us like poisonous snakes, refusing to let me work or my daughter attend school." But after learning about Bomb's illness, Guiseo not only stayed in their house, but also showed no fear of being close to her. Hearing her words, Guiseo became angry and said, "As a doctor, how could he be like those ignorant villagers?" Growing more agitated, he stood up and shouted, wanting the whole village to hear how foolish their behavior was. Startled, Youngshin rushed to stop him, only to accidentally fall into his arms again. Seeing her run off in embarrassment, Guiseo mocked himself, saying, "I don't have any contagious disease. You know, you don't have to act so cautious every time we get a little close." Youngshin awkwardly asked Guiseo, saying she wasn't afraid, but deep down she still was. Right. After all, she was the mother of an HIV patient, so finding it hard to accept was normal. Guiseo didn't say much more and simply held out his hand, signaling for her to pull it, then asked, "Can I kiss you?" After a kiss, Guiseo told Youngshin that having HIV was not a great crime. There was no need to feel ashamed. It was just being a little different from others. So she shouldn't live like a sinner, but stand tall and live with dignity. Youngshin didn't want Guiseo to stay with her out of pity. Holding back her emotions, she told him that she was not a woman, but only Bomb's mother, so he shouldn't pity her, shouldn't feel sorry for her, and shouldn't like her. Then she turned around and walked away. Youngshin saw an elderly woman in the village, struggling and wanted to help, but she was afraid the woman might be uncomfortable knowing she carried the virus. So she carefully asked from a distance if the woman wanted her help. When the woman nodded, Youngshin happily thanked her. Watching from afar, Guiseo could only sigh and say to himself that she was such a fool. Early the next morning, a group of angry villagers came. wanting to drive Youngshin's family out of the village for still refusing to leave. To keep her daughter from being hurt, Youngshin asked Guiseo to take Bomb away first, while she stayed behind to face the villagers alone. This time, she no longer retreated but bravely repeated the words Guiseo had told her the night before. "Being sick is not a sin. Our family will stay and live with dignity." Her words enraged the villagers, and they rushed forward to drive her out by force. Ignoring their anger, Youngshin quietly waited for them to leave, then calmly cleaned up the house that had been destroyed. The little girl wanted to play with her classmates, but when they saw her, they became frightened and didn't dare approach. She immediately pointed to her clothes and explained that she was wearing the magic coat so she wouldn't spread HIV to anyone. But the other children only called her a demon and told her to stay away. Bomb said she wasn't a demon but an angel. Just then, Siokyun's mother brought her grandson to school. Seeing what was happening, she angrily stepped forward and scolded the boy for being rude. Although she refused to admit that Bomb was her biological granddaughter, deep down she cared deeply for the sensible little girl and was very fond of her. The frightened boy threw a stone toward them. The old woman shielded Bomb with her body and was struck on the head, fainting instantly. Youngshin discovered that her daughter had secretly gone to school. On her way there, she met Bomb running out to look for help. Seeing her mother and Guiseo arrive, Bomb ran into Guiseo's arms, crying as she told them what had just happened. Siokyun's mother was taken to the hospital for treatment. Youngshin went to the ward to thank her, but the woman completely ignored her and angrily scolded Youngshin, saying she shouldn't have given birth so carelessly, and that by failing to take responsibility afterward, she had caused poor Bomb to be infected with HIV. Youngshin lowered her head and endured all the accusations. Guiseo, unable to stand it any longer, burst into the room and demanded to know why she didn't fight back, why she foolishly stood there being insulted. Then he turned to Siokyun's mother and asked, "So are you saying it's acceptable to kill an unborn life at will?" His question left her speechless. Guiseo pulled Youngshin out of the hospital, wanting to take her home. But Youngshin, angry, refused to get in the car and scolded him for talking to an elder like that. He, on the other hand, reproached her for being such a fool, standing there and letting herself be humiliated, asking if she was enduring it in hopes that one day that woman would accept her as a daughter-in-law. Youngshin's silence made Guiseo misunderstand that she still had feelings for Siokyun, and that her tolerance came from fear of offending his mother. So he angrily said, "From now on, I will never interfere in your affairs again. Even if you're about to die in front of me, I won't even blink an eye." Because of this, the two of them began a cold war. That night, Bomb received a call from her best friend Bo Ram. Bo Ram had heard that Bomb now had a magic coat that would keep her from spreading the frightening HIV, so she happily invited Bomb to go behind the mountain to see some newborn kittens. Knowing that Bomb had secretly gone there, Youngshin went out into the storm to find her and discovered that both children were trapped in a large pit. She immediately chose to pull her own daughter out first. But seeing Bo Ram crying in fear, Bomb didn't hesitate and told her mother to save Bo Ram first. Because Bomb was ill and couldn't risk getting injured, Youngshin wanted to rescue her daughter first. But seeing her daughter continuously shaking her head, she finally gave in and saved Bomb's friend first. At that moment, a branch suddenly fell from above. Youngshin was severely injured and was rushed to the hospital. When Guiseo received the news, he ran there in a panic, completely forgetting the harsh words he had said to her earlier that day. At the hospital, he first comforted Bomb, who was feeling guilty and blaming herself, and then personally treated Youngshin. The situation was grim. Youngshin had fractured ribs that damaged an artery, and without stopping the bleeding, her life would be in danger. The village hospital not only had poor equipment but also lacked a blood supply. Because of the storm, it was impossible to reach a major hospital in the city, so they could only beg the villagers to come and donate blood. In truth, back then, Siokyun had genuinely liked Youngshin. His pursuit of her wasn't just because of a bet, but in his youth, he didn't know how to cherish her and easily let that love go. Even now, though he had a fiancée and clearly knew he shouldn't get close to Youngshin or care about poor Bomb, he couldn't control his feelings. His fiancée accidentally found Siokyun's diary and learned about his long-held feelings for Youngshin and the truth that Bomb was their daughter. Although heartbroken and reluctant, Siokyun's kind fiancée generously chose to let go, allowing him to bravely go and find the mother and daughter again. When Youngshin had the serious accident and urgently needed a blood transfusion to save her life, the villagers heard the hospital's announcement calling for donors, but not a single person was willing to come. Just because she had a daughter with HIV, everyone was afraid that contact with her might infect them with the virus. While Youngshin's life was hanging by a thread due to the villagers' indifference, Siokyun, who had a matching blood type, heard the news and immediately rushed to the hospital. Thanks to his timely blood donation, Guiseo was able to save Youngshin's life. Although it was a bit late, the neighborly aunt, who had a good relationship with Young Shin's family also brought her son, who had blood type B, to donate blood. Siokyun's mother, outwardly strict but soft-hearted inside, even offered over 50 million won in compensation, along with a large diamond ring, to persuade her niece with blood type B to donate. The next morning, when Young Shin opened her eyes, she saw Siokyun, who had stayed up all night watching over her. Although she regained consciousness, she needed to be transferred to a city hospital for further treatment. Siokyun wanted to ride in the ambulance with her, but Guiseo was one step ahead and got in first as the attending doctor. Inside the ambulance, the two of them felt extremely awkward because of what had just happened in the hospital room and because of their cold quarrel the day before, and neither of them spoke a word. Meanwhile, Siokyun went to Young Shin's house to bring Bomb and her grandfather, who suffered from Alzheimer's and had no one to care for him, back to his own home. Siokyun's mother grew angry and scolded her son for bringing a child with HIV into their home. For the first time, Siokyun confronted his mother, who refused to accept the truth. He spoke frankly, admitting that Bomb was his daughter, and pleaded with her to help take care of the poor child. He said, "She's not a child with HIV. She's my daughter, your granddaughter. We are a family." Afterwards, he went to the hospital, waited outside the operating room with Guiseo, and confessed his decision to pursue Young Shin again. But Guiseo said, "You came too late, Siokyun, because I was already drawn to her before you turned back." At that moment, the doctor came out of the operating room. Hearing that Young Shin's condition was stable, the two men finally felt relieved. Guiseo said, "Young Shin and Bomb are miracles in the darkness of my life. Someone gave me that miracle as a gift." After saying what was in his heart, he went to the ward, held Young Shin's hand until she woke up, and then confessed his love boldly. He said firmly, "Whether you accept it or not, I have no intention of giving up." In truth, Young Shin had loved Guiseo for a long time, but her feelings of inferiority made her too afraid to accept him. Crying, she said she wasn't worthy. "There are so many beautiful women in this world. It shouldn't be me. Please don't be so kind to me anymore." But Guiseo answered her only with a passionate kiss that left her completely unable to resist. After everything they had been through, the two of them finally came together. Outside, Siokyun received a phone call. It was Bomb, crying as she told him that her magic coat had been burned by her grandmother, who thought it was trash. Siokyun comforted his daughter. "Don't worry, Daddy will buy you another one right away." At that moment, the grandmother saw Bomb covered in dirt and told the maid to prepare a bath for her. But Bomb was so frightened that she backed away, nervously saying, "Don't come near me. I'm not wearing my magic coat right now. I'll give you HIV." The grandmother was heartbroken. She went to the bathroom, took out the HIV prevention pamphlet that the village doctor had distributed, and studied it carefully. Then she told Bomb, who was deliberately keeping everyone away, that HIV wouldn't spread even if they bathed together. After that, she spoke at length about how HIV wasn't something terrible. To cheer Bomb up, she even told the maid to prepare a bath with rose petals. Bomb was overjoyed and sweetly praised her grandmother, saying she was so cool, just like a movie star. The two of them enjoyed the bubble bath together. Bomb suddenly said that she used to get upset when people said they looked alike, but now she didn't feel angry at all because her grandmother looked so kind. Although she liked beautiful people, she said she still wanted to look kind like her grandmother. The grandmother was deeply moved by her granddaughter's innocent words. She truly regretted all the cruel things she had done and the hateful words she had once spoken about Bomb. She even said she would take full responsibility for curing Bomb of her hateful HIV. Even if she had to go bankrupt, she would make sure Bomb was cured and wouldn't let her leave this world so easily. The two of them hugged each other and cried. When Siokyun hurried home and stood outside the bathroom, he heard his mother finally accepting Bomb, and he couldn't hold back his tears. Meanwhile, Guiseo heard that a nurse had taken Young Shin to wash her hair. He went to the room and quietly dismissed the nurse, then washed her hair himself. Though still a bit clumsy, he was very gentle. After regaining her health, Young Shin returned to the village. During this time together, her relationship with Guiseo had grown even deeper. Siokyun brought Bomb to welcome Young Shin home. The mother and daughter joyfully hugged each other. Young Shin thanked Siokyun for taking care of her daughter during this time. Bomb pointed to her clothes and told her mother that they were bought by her grandmother, who also said she would help cure her HIV. Then Bomb hugged Guiseo tightly and said she had missed him so much. Seeing the three of them together like a happy family, Siokyun walked away with a look of disappointment on his face. As soon as Bomb returned home, she hugged and kissed her mother non-stop, happily saying, "Doing this won't spread HIV. It's really amazing." Young Shin curiously asked, "Why did you suddenly come to understand that? You told me so many times before, but I never believed you. Now I do, because Grandma taught me." Outside the door, Guiseo quietly listened to the joyful laughter between mother and daughter, feeling a happiness he had never known before. After returning to the village, Guiseo proposed to Young Shin. She was caught off guard by the sudden proposal and didn't know whether to biddable, accept it or not. Not getting a clear answer, Guiseo wasn't upset. Every 3 days, he would gently remind her to agree soon, and took on the responsibilities of a future husband. He wholeheartedly helped her care for her Alzheimer's-stricken father and her ill daughter. Although Young Shin didn't immediately accept Guiseo's proposal, in her heart, she had already acknowledged the man who had always been by her side. Therefore, when faced with Siokyun's attempt to win her back, she didn't give him any chance, and directly refused, saying that she no longer liked him and that he no longer had a place in her heart. Unwilling to accept it, Siokyun asked, "Is it because of Guiseo?" Without hesitation, Young Shin admitted that the man she liked was indeed Guiseo. After clearly defining her relationship with Siokyun, Bom and her grandmother grew closer. However, Young Shin didn't want her daughter to have too much contact with Siokyun's family. When she heard that Bom had gone to visit Siokyun's mother again, she became displeased and wanted to bring her daughter home. Siokyun's mother had never liked Young Shin, and not long ago, after learning that her son had broken off his engagement, she believed that Young Shin had ruined her son's good marriage, so she said many unpleasant things. She said that she acknowledged Bom as her granddaughter, but would rather die than accept Young Shin as her daughter-in-law. Witnessing this, Siokyun became furious and told his mother not to treat Young Shin that way. He knew that his mother only wanted him to be successful and to find an accomplished wife so that the father who had once abandoned them would see that even without a husband and father, the two of them could still live well. That was why she refused to accept someone like Young Shin, who had grown up an orphan and now had to care for a grandfather with Alzheimer's. Siokyun said to his mother, "Please forgive my father. Even if you can't stand, at least try to forgive. Not for anyone else, but for yourself. Only then can you free yourself and stop suffering." Sitting by the sea, Young Shin greeted her late parents and thought of Guiseo's late girlfriend. She told him to greet his former lover too, because he had once said that the dead should be visited often, so they wouldn't feel lonely. Young Shin expressed her gratitude to Guiseo, thanking his kind-hearted girlfriend for giving Bom such a lovely teddy bear. Guiseo could no longer hold it in and revealed his late girlfriend's final words. Guiseo could see that she had asked him to apologize to Young Shin. She hadn't meant to, but she was deeply sorry, saying that even until her death she was filled with guilt and pain. At last, Young Shin learned the cruel truth. The doctor who had unknowingly transmitted HIV to Bom through a blood transfusion years ago was actually Guiseo's former girlfriend. She couldn't accept such a devastating reality. Young Shin confronted him, asking if all his kindness toward Bom and all his care for them had only been out of guilt and remorse. She called him a bastard and then turned away. When she got home, Young Shin threw away the teddy bear that her daughter treasured most. Heartbroken, Bom secretly picked it up while her mother was away and carefully washed it clean. Because of her son's earlier words, Siokyun's mother was deeply shaken. Unable to overcome the emotional barrier or forgive her unfaithful husband, she fell into despair and went to the sea, intending to end her life. Young Shin's grandfather, who suffered from Alzheimer's, discovered the old woman and managed to stop her in time. But in the process, he accidentally got injured and had to be taken to the hospital. Worried, Young Shin stayed by his bedside. When Guiseo heard the news, he rushed over and immediately examined him. After learning that his blood pressure and pulse had stabilized, Young Shin finally felt relieved. When the old man woke up, he suddenly told Guiseo to go buy 100 pieces of chocolate, his favorite treat. Confused, the two of them followed his request, carrying a large pile of chocolates as they accompanied him to visit every household in the village where he had lived all his life. At each doorstep, he said a heartfelt thank you. Young Shin didn't understand why he was doing this and tried to persuade him to go home and rest, but he refused no matter what she said. Unable to watch any longer, Guiseo stepped forward and carried him on his back. On the way home, the old man couldn't hold back his tears and wept bitterly like a child. When they returned home, he stubbornly insisted on going out again to deliver the rest of the chocolates he hadn't given away. Young Shin hugged him tightly to stop him, crying as she said, "The villagers haven't been kind to us. Just because Bom has HIV, they didn't let her go to school or play with the other kids. There's nothing to thank them for." She couldn't understand why her grandfather was so determined to push his frail body to do something so pointless that night. Held firmly in her arms, the old man could only look toward Guiseo with pleading eyes, mumbling repeatedly that he wanted to go out. Driven out of the room by Young Shin, Guiseo still heard the old man's voice from inside saying, "I want to go." So he took the chocolates himself and went around delivering them to the remaining villagers. In the middle of the night, the old man went to Guiseo's room, quietly left a piece of chocolate, and said a single word of thanks. Then he went to Young Shin and Bom's room and told the two people he loved most that he was leaving soon, that he would go ahead to the other world to reunite with his son and daughter-in-law. "You've worked so hard, my dear granddaughter. Thank you, my little Bom." The next morning, the villagers all received the old man's final tokens of gratitude, like a fading light before dusk. Bom ran anxiously to her mother, who was washing her face, and said, "I've been calling Grandpa, but he won't wake up." Young Shin told her to try waking him up to eat some chocolate, but Bomb said she had already called him over 100 times and shaken him, yet he still wouldn't wake up. Feeling an ominous premonition, Young Shin's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. Seeing the piece of chocolate in his room, Guiseo rushed into the old man's bedroom. Not long after, he came out with a heavy expression, looking at the anxious Young Shin and Bomb without saying a word. After the funeral arrangements were completed, Young Shin told Bomb to return to school. But the little girl refused no matter what. She was afraid her classmates wouldn't play with her and didn't want to be pelted with stones again. Feeling helpless, Young Shin decided to take her daughter and leave the village to start a new life elsewhere. A few village women happened to witness Young Shin moving away. When Guiseo returned home, he found the house empty. He immediately drove off and managed to catch up with the mother and daughter not long after they had left. Angry, he asked Young Shin why she was suddenly leaving. Young Shin replied that it wasn't a sudden decision. She had wanted to leave long ago, but because of her grandfather, she couldn't bring herself to part with her hometown. Now that he was gone, she had no reason to stay. Guiseo immediately asked, "What about me? Aren't I a reason for you to stay? Am I really that unimportant to you?" Agitated, he explained, "It's not out of pity or guilt that I want to be with you. It's simply because I love you. I came back to this remote village without even a convenience store because I love you too much. When I'm away from you, I feel like I can't breathe. I've always told you this. You're just the one who refused to listen." At that moment, several village women came running over to stop Young Shin, crying as they apologized for their past wrongdoings and begged her to stay. Then 2 village men rushed over as well, blocking the car with their bodies to prevent her from leaving. Other villagers, hearing the news, also arrived one after another. Gradually, everyone began to understand that HIV wasn't something to be feared. They were now willing to accept Bomb and even helped Young Shin enthusiastically carry her luggage back home. Bomb and Siokyun's mother's niece innocently promised to marry each other when they grew up, which startled the grandmother so much that she sternly told them it was impossible because they were blood relatives. Everyone remarked that Bomb and her grandmother looked alike, even down to the mole by their mouths. That was because Bomb was her real granddaughter, because Bomb and the grandmother were family. Just then, Siokyun arrived home. Bomb couldn't believe it and immediately asked the kind uncle who had always been so good to her if he was really her biological father. Looking at his daughter, whose eyes were filled with tears, Siokyun denied their relationship. He crouched down and gently told little Bomb that her father must surely be someone more outstanding, kinder, and more handsome. Siokyun's mother couldn't understand why her son refused to tell Bomb the truth. Siokyun, with a bitter smile, said that all these years he had done nothing for Young Shin and Bomb, so he had no right to claim her as his daughter, nor the right to destroy Young Shin's happiness. He admitted that Guiseo was right. He had indeed come too late. Knowing how much her son wanted to make amends to Young Shin and Bomb, Siokyun's mother knelt before Guiseo, begging him to step aside and give the mother and daughter a chance to be redeemed, to let Siokyun be Bomb's father again, and for her to be a grandmother once more. Hearing their conversation, Young Shin broke down in tears. Later, she took the initiative to ask Siokyun to meet her. Siokyun hurried over, not knowing how to face the woman he had wronged the most. But Young Shin smiled gently and said to him, "Thank you for giving me Bomb. Giving birth to her and raising her has been such a joyful, happy thing. If Bomb didn't exist, this world would be such an unhappy place." Softly, she continued, "It's all thanks to you. Actually, every time I see you, I always want to say thank you." Siokyun called out to Young Shin just before she was about to leave and said, "I also want to thank you for giving birth to Bomb, for raising her to be such a lovely girl, and for telling her that her father is a good man. I truly thank you." The two looked at each other and smiled, finally freeing themselves from all the burdens in their hearts. When Young Shin returned home, she saw that Guiseo had been waiting there for her all along. She asked him, "So, having no father doesn't mean Bomb is bad or strange, it just means she's different, right? And being a single mother isn't wrong or something to apologize for, it's just different, isn't it?" Guiseo smiled and said, "Of course, that's what I told you before. It's like how some people have a smaller left eye, some are taller, and some have a thumb longer than their middle finger. It just means being a little different." A year later, the village doctor's photographer brother brought his favorite work to show everyone in the village. In one of the photos, the silhouette of the late grandfather mysteriously appeared. The brother was so startled by the photo that he stammered, saying he had clearly only photographed Bomb, and it was taken after the old man had already passed away. The neighborly aunt looked at the picture of the old man shading Bomb from the sun as she slept and burst into tears, saying, "So he's still here. He never really left." The people around all greeted him warmly, completely unafraid or disturbed by the strange occurrence. Protected by the grandfather, the mother and daughter returned to their normal lives. The villagers gradually stopped fearing little Bomb for having HIV and invited Young Shin to return to her previous job, no longer shunning her. her. Bomb also went back to school, free from discrimination, able to grow up happily like any other child with her friends. The mother and daughter now had another person to protect them. What was once just the two of them had become a happy family of three. Young Shin asked Guiseo, "Do you believe in miracles?" Guiseo simply replied, "Do you?" And the two of them both believed in miracles. For Guiseo, Young Shin and Bomb were the miracle themselves.